Welcome to WinCAMS webinar number 8, direct charges and accounts payable. I'm recording this webinar for you can it'll be on our website at www.cascadegovsoftware.com, and you can go to the user portal and look at our videos. It'll also be on our YouTube channel, which you should subscribe to. It's called the WinCAMS channel. Always trying to grow our content there. And but for those of you that are here today, you can also, if you have any questions or you don't understand something, or you want me to redo something, you can throw it into the chat, and I'll try to get to it in sequence. If you're having technical difficulties, email support@cascadegovsoftware.com, or yeah, that'll work. Email support at and we'll try to get you get you set up. Okay, so as I said, what we're talking about today is direct charges. The reason they're called direct charges is to differentiate them, or that's a term that I don't know where it came from, but it's been there forever, since I've been doing this 27 years, and as opposed to applied charges, right? Applied charges are where we're building rates. So we've got employee labor rates that are built up for, with fringes and maybe non-productive time. Maybe there's overhead, there's percentages, there's rates that you set for equipment usage. And I don't want to say they're made up. They're not made up, but they are calculated. And so they are applied or weighted. Whereas with direct charges, they are pretty much as they are. If you bought something and the vendor gave you a price, whether it was a good price or not is questionable, but if you paid it, you paid it, and you want it to come out of be distributed to whatever you're distributing to. So I made a little outline here of the basics of the module to kind of sort of guide us through it. But again, if I leave anything out, or I go too fast, or I go too slow, or you can't see something or whatever, then please don't hesitate to throw something in the chat and let me know. Okay, so number one, what we're talking about today is in the direct charges module right here. All these programs, and well, I probably won't talk about all of them, but a lot of these programs. So, and then there's also something that we built years ago and that we throw in with the direct charges module is called small works and consultants rosters. So everybody who has the direct charges module also has this module. I believe it was named by the director of public works at San Juan County in Washington. He called it small works. Hopefully that means something to all of you. What it means to me is small works in work interests, right? So these are people, I think, that they are either not yet vendors, or well, it's like almost like a pre-vendor, right? So I have people that may be plumbers, or companies that may be so it looks a lot like the vendors, but we can tie them to interests, right? So we have work interests: carpet laying, electrical, fencing, accounting, software, whatever else. Laura is asking if anyone else just got disconnected. I'm not seeing that. I see 46 people in here. And we can go up. There's no limit. Well, I think maybe 250 or something. So so you can tie them to your to these work interests, and you can and then you can use it to look up small works businesses that are plumbers, if you want to try to get them to bid on a job or something like that, right? And then if they if they get selected for a job, maybe then they become an actual vendor, okay? So this was something that San Juan County told us was everybody was having to keep track of, and so we added it in there. So small works and consultants are pretty similar. And then there's one called the third one. Oh, there's volunteers roster, and you can for each one you can specify what the work interests are for those groups. So that's like a precursor to the vendor table, which is right here under masters or under CAMS, direct charges, vendors. Okay, so this is the building block of the direct charges module. This is the main. You can't have an invoice without a vendor, and you can't have an encumbrance without a vendor. I don't think. You can have a journal without a vendor, of course. The reason this search came up is because I must have set my option at some point, show search screen at start of vendors. This was something that we built a long time ago because we thought maybe people with very large databases might want to turn on this setting where they want to narrow it down before, like right away, just to dump them into, if you have 10,000 projects or something, you may say, no, I always want to narrow it down. And we've made it easier to narrow down through the directory. In any place where we think there's going to be a very large database, we put filters up at the top, okay? And so we encourage people to filter right away when they're in there if they need to. So all we really need for a vendor is the number, and sometimes we auto number these, but in this case we don't. That's all we really need is a name and a number, okay? And that will get us most of where we want to be. However, a lot of times people want to keep a lot more information in here, name and address, and categorize them, and contact information. And then especially later, as we get to printing claims or vouchers or whatever you call them, that's where we need this detailed information about the vendors, okay? And now if you are exporting your invoices to an auditor system, no auditor system is going to ask us for the address of the vendor. Okay, so don't worry about that. We just need this number. And by the way, maybe we'll talk about that during the export, but every vendor number needs to be unique. I don't see anyone else getting disconnected, Laura. I don't know what, that's got to be you, because you're calling into GoToMeeting. So I think there's something going on with your phone. You're not calling us. You might be able to do it on your computer as well. So every vendor number needs to be unique. Now, many auditor systems have a vendor number, and then they have the same vendor number twice. So for like AT&T, they might have Denver and Atlanta, or they might have different address codes. So what we do with that is we still have a unique vendor number, but we have an interface vendor down here at the bottom and an interface location. So I can say 12345 is AT&T, and it's in Denver, right? And then I can say, well, their interface vendor is 12345, and their location or their address code is 1. And then I can copy this same vendor and I can call it -2, right? I broke it. My work interest is not valid. Did I have a work interest? Oh, geez. Don't do that. Hold on. And so I can put in the second vendor, 12345-2, with a unique number, right? And then I can say, okay, this one is AT&T Atlanta, and then it's got the original vendor number and the location too. And so then if you have an export, we will override our vendor number with this vendor number and location if that's appropriate. So most of your vendors, you don't have multiple locations. Some of them you have a couple locations or even more. And so you can use that if you want. And anything we talk about with exports or claim forms, voucher forms, those are all customized, right? So they'll be specific for your needs, okay? But any of your exports should do this if that makes sense. And remember, the goal is in any export to not have to touch the record as on the other side, okay? So we've got a main tab here where we set up the vendor number. This is a list of the invoices. Let's try to find somebody that has some invoices. Let's see here. Wonder if we have, invoice count, how nice. So there's somebody, I added a field with my optional columns to my directory for the invoice count. So this American Association of Airport Executives has 2 invoices. It tells me that right here, and I can see that. Okay, and the total, right? And I can also control the, so I just double clicked on it and that takes me to the invoice. So if a vendor calls you and wants to check on the status of something, you can go find that vendor, right, with your find if you know the vendor number, with your search if you don't, or you can also, the vendor is one of the few, I think there's vendors, AR clients, and employees that have a by name checkbox, right? So now if I say by name, then as I'm going through, you see I'm at American Association of something. Now I'm at AT&T, another AT&T Auto, right? I'm going in alphabetical order, not vendor number order, although these vendor numbers look like they're in the same order too. But also if I go to search, it looks for the vendor name. So if I say American, then it takes me to American Association of Airport Executives, right? Because I checked the by name box. So now, so if they call and say, well, what's going on with our $100,000 invoice, then I can go to the invoices tab, and I can see make sure that they were entered, see whether they were interfaced, see whether they were posted, right? Now a lot of times we either get, and we'll talk about this, we either get back a confirmation from your auditor so that we can put in what the check number was, or you enter it manually, and then you can see it all here without going to your auditor system, and you can say, no, that was paid and has this warrant date and this warrant number. Okay. Show invoice detail lines. Cool. Interesting. These invoices must have only one detail line each, but if we show invoice detail lines, then we'll see projects and budget numbers and things like that. Okay, so that's where we list the invoices. Encumbrances, we're going to talk about that next. Encumbrances are promises to pay, contracts, purchase orders, blanket purchase orders, etc. These are specific discount rates and sales tax rates that go with these vendors, that you've agreed to with these vendors, or that you have to pay to these vendors. Work interests we talked about. This is similar to in the small works roster. Accounts was something that's specifically for vendors where you have a bunch of accounts. So what you can do here is, let's say you have a vendor like Verizon, and so then you have 30 phone numbers that are on Verizon, and you want to make sure, and you can, so if you list out all the account numbers that you have with this vendor, then when you go to an invoice, there's an account number here, and you can look it up and see what those account numbers are, right? And then you can say, yes, I've got the right vendor because I've got the right phone number, or if I have multiple accounts. Not really for data entry, it's just really to look up. You could data enter there, but it's really to look up and make sure you have the right vendor there. okay? Our traditional notes, unlimited notes, make new pages, write novels, whatever you feel like, it's unlimited. Insert your date, time, and initials if you want to, print them out. Linked files, if you have a contract with this vendor or an agreement with them or anything at all, you could drag and drop a linked file onto here, okay? And then our typical directory. So this is kind of interesting. If I add invoice count to the vendor directory and then I sort by invoice count and I reverse it, then I can, this actually happens a lot where people say, hey, I've only got 155 vendors, but many of our clients have thousands and thousands of vendors. Most, I would say most people use between 200 and 600 vendors in a year. And so if you have 4,000 vendors, you either have all the vendors in your entire county that we loaded for you, or you have a bunch of old inactive vendors, or you are really throwing money around a lot of places, which is fine. But it's but this can be nice to see, okay, at the end of a year, you know, we've got a lot of vendors we don't have any invoices with. Do we want to keep those in our vendor master or not? Okay. So once we've got our vendor master set up, we can use our lightning bolt, which is a growing tool that we're trying to use. I'm really, if you've been watching these webinars, you've heard this before, but I'm really trying to improve the connectivity between WinCAMS screens, right? So if you're a strong user, and probably most of you are, you know how to go out and say, okay, transactions, invoices, or CAMS, direct charges, invoices, or maybe you even have your MyCAMS menu set up with invoices, right? So you know how to do that, but that's just extra clicks and it's annoying. And so what I want to be able to do is say, okay, well, we've got this set up so that you can enter a vendor, you can edit a vendor, you can delete a vendor. So what else might you want to do? You know, where you see what you want here. Well, of course, I want to be able to double click here and go to the invoice. There we go. Or I might want to say, okay, I want to, what else might I want to do? And I'm totally open to suggestions on this quick connect. So when you see this lightning bolt up here, so we can either enter an invoice for this vendor, we can run a report, we can print claims for it, we can post invoices, and none of these will cause anything to go. It's just linking you to the other screen with this vendor preloaded. So it's just trying to save you a few clicks and get you going here. So if you said, well, run a vendor report or run an invoice report for this vendor, it'll call up the invoice report. And you know, there's lots more things you might want to do, but it's already selected to this vendor. Okay, and so you can just hit go, or you could change your optional columns, you could add a date range, you could change the way it's sorted, whatever you want to do. Okay, there's my 2 invoices for this vendor, $200,000. Okay, so I'm looking to add more of these all over WinCAMS, you know, and we've added some that were a little overkill, that were, you know, I don't know, there are just too many options. It was just confusing, but these are the main, we're trying to find the main things that you would want to do with, you know, when I'm looking at a vendor, what else would I want to do with this vendor? Okay. All right, so once you have vendors entered, then your next step might be encumbrances. Now, many of our clients don't do encumbrances. All of our clients do encumbrances in the real world. I get POs from you guys. That's oftentimes the way that people show me that they approve a change order, or that they want to go forward with a project, right? is they show me the PO, and then I know that the money is budgeted and encumbered. Many of our clients do not encumber in WinCAMS. You don't have to encumber in WinCAMS, but it can be a really valuable tool. So that's why I put the first question here is why encumber? Okay, so it's certainly not required to encumber, and many of our clients tell us that that a lot of times things go backwards, right? So they encumber, or they I don't know, they go out and buy a truck and then they go and get the PO later. You're not supposed to do that, but maybe I don't know, people get away with it or whatever. But the reason to encumber in WinCAMS is twofold. So that would be a good one to have in the in here, is enter a PO or an encumbrance for this vendor, right? So the reason to encumber in WinCAMS is there's two reasons. And the reason they're called encumbrance documents is because they might be any number of things. They might be a PO, a blanket PO, a regular PO, a contract, whatever other types you may choose. But there are two reasons to encumber. One is to recognize that the money is allotted or accounted for or promised, right? So if you have an encumbrance to me to pay your maintenance agreement, even if I haven't yet billed you, you can know when you look at your budgets and when you look at me as a vendor, when you look at your projects, you can know that that money is promised to pay, that you expect that to come in. So if you have a budget for software of $100,000, you don't get, and just because I haven't sent you your bill yet, that doesn't mean you're not unaware of the fact that you will owe your maintenance agreement, right? So that's the first thing, is to actually encumber the budget. And so it works in concert with a budget appropriation or a project appropriation, saying this is how much we expect to spend or has been budgeted for this area of our balance sheet. And then encumbering means we haven't received an invoice yet, but we're going to. Yes, Angela, we will. It's recording, and we are, and I'll post it to the YouTube channel and to our website. So we're going to enter an encumbrance, and then it will post to. We do not encumber to the other modules, roads, vehicles, cost centers. We don't encumber to them, but you can still put them in. So that's the second reason to encumber, and that is to make your invoice data entry easier, right? So if you have a contract with me, like a maintenance contract, and someone has decided that it's going to be paid out of this road fund special department expense, right? Then when you enter when you get my invoice, you don't have to wonder where is this going to be paid out of, because you already looked that up, decided, etc. And so when you tie into that encumbrance, all this detail will tie in. Okay, so let's enter an encumbrance. So the encumbrance is kind of interesting. It's got a requisition number, and the reason for that is because people told us that first of all, we don't always have a purchase order number, and we may just be requesting a purchase order, right? We may be saying, hey, I want to spend $10,000 with Ayren. So I'm going to request that I get a purchase order. I don't have a purchase order number yet, so so my requisition number is here. Now, oftentimes in reality, a lot of people wait to put this in until they have a purchase order already. So then the requisition and the purchase order number ends up being the same. Now, maybe that's true in real life too, I don't know, but the way we're going to reference it later is through the purchase order number, okay? Then the encumbrance type. These are the standard encumbrance types. You can add more, right? If you want to, if you're like, I don't see an encumbrance type that we use, or these don't fit in with our protocol or doing business. And by the way, encumbering means that when it posts, it actually reserves the money out of your budget and your project. And non-encumbering means it doesn't reserve the money. Do not ask me why you would want a blanket PO that's non-encumbering. I guess maybe you don't expect to actually spend it. I don't know. So if you want to, as with any of our lookups, you can right click and say open the source program. Another connectivity thing that I've been working on. And so it'll take you to that, so you don't have to go out to the menus and find, well, how do I enter a new encumbrance type, or how do I correct a misspelling, or whatever else. And so we have, if you don't have any encumbrance types, we have a load defaults button that will load basically these you see here. And you can tell us whether it's got a description, whether it encumbers, and whether it should be interfaced. Okay. If you have a PO interface. Some people have interfaces for their encumbrance documents. Okay, so let's see, I'm going to call it a regular PO. And this is the most important part. I got to tie it to a vendor. So who am I doing this with? So let's see if we're in here. There we are. Okay, so we are C04000 Cascade Software Systems. It says fiscal year 2016 because that's the year that this is my test database. So a lot of times people don't put in descriptions. It's been kind of annoying me lately because I don't know why people wouldn't, so I can understand what's going on. Let's see, maintenance for WinCAMS. Okay. So then you could say when the if there's an expiration date, when the services start, right? So maybe we're in 15/16, so I'll say 07/01/15 through 06/30/16, right? And then the rest of this is not terribly important. Some of these are for specific things here and whether they renew and all that. The big one though is this year-end transfer. This is fairly unique to encumbrances. What do we want to do with this at year-end, right? So we have do not carry forward. That just means it ends. Whether you spent it all or you didn't spend it all, it's done, okay? We have carry balance forward becomes the original amount. So now if we set up a $10,000 encumbrance and I only bill you $8,500, that means this encumbrance is going to roll forward in your year end, and it's going to say now I'm a $1,500 encumbrance for the remainder, right? So that makes sense for like a large contract, maybe. Depends on how you like to think of it, right? The carry original amount forward, that means basically restart it, right? So then it's another $10,000 the next year, and it starts fresh with $10,000. Carry original amount and balance forward is where it would still say $10,000, but it would also show that you paid $8,500, so you have a remainder of $1,500. And then carry balance forward as new year encumbrance. I think that's different from this first option, because if we carry balance forward, it'll be as a prior year encumbrance, okay? And that will take place in the final ledger transfer, okay? So I'm going to say carry balance forward, it becomes the original amount. Okay, so now I'm going to say, well, what are we expected to do now? So this could be the exact amount. A lot of people email me and say, what's my maintenance going to be next year? You know, and so we have our cost of living adjustment and our and then any maintenance that is added on from your for any change orders you did that year or things like that. So let's just say that this California county is going to pay expecting to pay $12,460 in maintenance. Okay, so If there's sales tax, if there's you know, and we'll talk about adjustments in a moment. So now we've got a total amount in the encumbrance of 12,460, and we've expended nothing, we've liquidated nothing. I'll talk about that in a moment, and we have no pending payments. Okay, so now we want to set up a distribution just like we would on an invoice, right? So we hit plus here, and we say, you know, maintenance contract, and maybe I give it the number that references the maintenance contract that's in your county's contract system. Now, so remember that my total was 12,460. So I'm going to say that 10,000 of it is the maintenance contract, and that is going to be paid out of, let's see if there's a budget called software. There we go, computer software expense, okay? And I'm also going to reference a project because I feel like it. Let's see here if we have any project that makes any sense. No, doesn't matter. I'll pick storm damage. This might not work. Okay, so it pulled in a cost center that it didn't like. I'm gonna clear that, see if it allows that. No, I'm gonna have to pick one. A lot of times I get in trouble with my test system because it's got a bunch of nonsense in it. So we did something funny with my test system here, and so my projects are not correctly defined. Okay, I'm going to take off the project just for kicks. Okay, so now I've got a $10,000 line, and then I'm going to make line 2, and I'm going to say this is also let's say it's Marin County, and they, well, in pre-pandemic, they would have me come there several times a year. Many of our clients like to throw into their maintenance contract a site visit for training and for helping them with WinCAMS. So they call that we want to separate that out because we maybe don't bill them until we actually perform the site visit and schedule it. So that is going to be 2,460, and maybe it gets paid out of a different line item. Sure. Let's see. There we go. How about staff development and training? Develop some staff. Okay. And maybe cost center doesn't mean anything to our friends in Washington, but that's okay. Doesn't matter. Remember, we only encumber to the budget and the project, right? So the other things that we might put in here, roads, routes, service requests, etc., are important because they can prep for the invoice, but they aren't going to actually encumber that thing. Okay, so you notice that I evened out my distribution. I have 12,460. I got 12. There's no more yellow. Now I go to my references tab. Now I may do something that at this point where I might want to. I may print a form. Some of our clients have forms. Let's see here, encumbrance document, purchase order form. I haven't tried this lately. Let's see if we have a form here. So if I hit what I did was I hit the printer button right there, and it brought up the encumbrance document form already pre-selected to my requisition number. Let's just see what happens. It's not, I don't have it set up, but these are normally customized. But if you do need a form, or if you're entering in WinCAMS, or you're not yet entering in WinCAMS and you're like, oh, I saw that, I'd like to, but you need to do a form, please don't go out to Excel and type up your own form. We'd rather do it for you. okay? And then some people export, but I'm just going to click auditor just to say, okay, I communicated with the auditor. Now, sometimes people say, well, I don't communicate with the auditor on this. This is just for my own information. So that's fine. And also on this references tab, this is showing any invoices that have referenced this encumbrance, which of course I just created it. So there's no invoices that reference this encumbrance. This has an extra tab called extended description. I'm not really sure why. It's a lot like the notes. Pending, these are invoices that reference that show the running balance of the encumbrance. Adjustments we're going to talk about. These are change orders that, because once the encumbrance is posted, you may say, okay, I want to bump up this PO or something, and or we're in the middle of a construction project and we've uncovered some sort of problem that we need to work with the contractor, and we've decided it's going to cost more. I'm having the siding removed from my house or replaced on my house, and they just sent me an extra invoice for all the crazy stuff they found in my super old house. So if I had a PO, then I would have to adjust the PO. Okay, so now, and if I have a contract with this vendor, or if you want to take the maintenance memo that I sent you and link it here, so you know where this 12,460 came from, you can do that, of course, in the linked files. Just drag and drop. Okay, and so now my next step is to post this document, right? So if I go to posting, direct charges, post encumbrance documents. So what this is going to do is, just like all WinCAMS posting, it's going to do two things. It's going to push the $12,000 out to the appropriate, let's see here, out to the appropriate budgets and projects, and then it's also going to lock down the original encumbrance. Okay, so I'm just going to select my encumbrance, and I'm going to hit add. So I'm saying I only want the encumbrance. I don't know why it doesn't say PO, but we call it the encumbrance number is 9999. Okay, and then I collect. Okay, so it says I'm going to post to I found one encumbrance to post. I'm going to hit two different budgets because we had two line items, and that would say two even if both line items had the same budget, because it doesn't know any better. Where I'm gonna create two transactions there, and then in this case, you remember I didn't put in any project, so there's no project to hit, but it's going to 4 general ledger accounts. Now my system is set up to post a general ledger. If you don't have the general ledger module, what we normally do with the general ledger is we use a GL control that says, okay, for each type of transaction, take the fund of the budget and now do matching pairs, right? So I don't know, I get out of my depth. You guys probably understand this stuff, but debit cash and credit liabilities and credit cash and debit receivables or something. I don't know, but we have a system that you can set up that will automatically hit those things. So now I write my audit trails just like any other posting program. And I see here $10,000 is going to encumber this budget, computer software expense, and $2,460 is going to encumber this budget, staff development and training. Probably unrealistic that they're in two different funds, but that doesn't matter. Okay, so there's the 12,460, and then you can see that it's crediting the 10,000 to reserved fund balance encumbrances current year, and debiting fund balance, and crediting budgetary fund balance clearing, and debiting encumbrances current year. Whether that is set up correctly, I can't even tell you, but it's doing it automatically. So I say yes, I like that, and I post valid records. Okay, post batch 7087. Okay, so what I can see now is now the status is posted. In my references tab, it says posted, it says post batch 7087, and if I try to type in it, I cannot edit it. Like, let's see, I don't want to misspeak. Yes, like invoices, you can change information, some information on a posted encumbrance document. So I'm right-clicking in here because a lot of people said, well, we have to hold off on our posting because we're waiting for the auditor's encumbrance number or something. So if I right-click in here, I get a little pop-up that allows me to change some things. So you notice here that you can even change the amount if it's a non-encumbering document. If the type is non-encumbering, then we don't care what the amount is because we didn't send the amount anywhere at all. Right? But if you want to change the expiration date, if you want to change, occasionally people change vendor numbers, that's kind of a big deal, but they can do it. If the PO or contract number needs to change, some of those things. Change the year-end transfer option, that can be really important, right? You didn't think that the contract would run over the year, but it ends up running over, so you want to change the year-end transfer option. So you can do that. Okay, but otherwise it's locked down. Now, what is going on with this? So let's go look. I'm going to use that linkage I talked about. I'm going to double click in this budget. Now you'll notice here that now this budget, remember I clicked in it before and it was blue at the bottom and its balance was 0. Its balance is now negative 10,000, so it's yellow at the bottom. If you see a lot of yellow here when you click into budgets, the reason for that is because we think the budget's underwater. Okay, not the end of the world, but the budget's underwater, and that's mostly because, most often because you didn't enter an appropriation. Okay, so I'm going to double click on that budget expenditure account cell, which brings up the budget expenditure ledger. If you guys are not using that tool, you should be using that. It's my favorite. It's my favorite. I love it. We did have 2 clients that hated it, and we had to turn it off. And I think it's because they are trying to, they're accidentally doing it all the time when they're clicking into the field instead of they're like clicking twice and then it brings up another screen. So, but I feel like maybe they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater there, because I just love it, because now I don't have to memorize this number. I don't have to find it in the menus. I don't have to hit find. It saves so many steps. So I just double click in there. And my reason for double clicking in there is because I want to show you that we now have a $10,000 encumbrance. And so our unencumbered balance is negative $10,000, and our unexpended balance, we haven't had any invoices. So we haven't spent anything in this budget. Okay. So I want to make this budget look better. So I'm going to go to the appropriations tab, and there should already be a line here. If there's not a line here, you can't even reference this budget because there's no appropriation for that fiscal year. Okay. Oh, look at that appropriation batch update. Neat. So I'm going to say that for computer software expenses, we're going to spend $50,000 this year. Okay. So now, if we go back here, now I have an appropriation. It's that easy. I don't need to post it or anything. It's very simple. If you probably have budget, budgets layouts. Now this came up actually with Pacific County last week. They said we do have budget appropriations, and we don't. But we never entered them in CAMS because we only budget. Now they have like a 6 or 7 part budget account number, and they said their WinCAMS budget is more detailed than their auditor's budget. And so their auditor was only budgeting down to the 4th or 5th element, and then they had 2 more elements. So unfortunately, we can't budget at a partial budget number. So it would be like saying, I want to budget at 1,200, 320, regardless of the 2148. So we really can't do that. So the best I could do for them, I mean, they could break it down the way they want to break it down, and so it adds up to the same total. That would be really good. Or they could they could make a dummy budget like 1,200, 320, 0000, and then that would not be for expenses. It would just be to hold that appropriation amount. And so then when you run a report, it would show up and the subtotal appropriation would be there to compare against the expenditures. but it's better, and I prefer it if you can budget and appropriate at every level or at every line item. So now I have an original appropriation of $50,000. So my unexpended balance is $50,000. I haven't spent anything in this budget yet, but I've encumbered $10,000, so I get a much more accurate picture of what's left in this budget. I have $40,000 left, okay? And if I had any pending expenditures, they would show here, right? And I'll show you that in a bit. Okay, so now, and I can go, this posted to create the $10,000, my encumbrance posted there, and it's here under encumbrances, right? So if there's a list of encumbrances that are hitting this budget, I've got this here. I can set my columns for this. I can push it to an Excel spreadsheet. I can open the encumbrance. I can click on that and then click that button. It takes me right to the encumbrance. Again, trying to do that connectivity. So let me know about ways that you use the system and that where you'd rather not go to the menu so much, and you know, we're trying to make that easier to follow that along. Like, oh, I'm looking at this budget. Okay, what's the status, or what's going on with it? What is that $10,000 encumbrance? I don't know. I'll go to the encumbrances tab. Oh, right, it's the Cascade software. I want to know more about it. I don't see enough information that I might want, so I'm going to go directly to it so I can really look at it and find out what's going on. Okay. And we've got no pending charges to this budget. So now we've built our budget and we've encumbered against our budget. The next step would be to, let's see what's next on my list. So a pretty common thing is an encumbrance adjustment and that's basically a change order, right? So I've got this encumbrance. Now you decide, you have some turnover and you decide that you want more training, or you want, you saw something in the webinar and you said, hey, I'd like a customized such and such form, or I'd like to talk about an interface with my auditor system. So you request a cost quote from me and you put it in. Now you may enter that as a new encumbrance, that's fine, but you may also say, no, I'm just going to add this and adjust the existing encumbrance. So I go to transactions, encumbrance adjustments. Okay, so what this is for is to adjust existing encumbrances, right, that have already, now if they haven't been posted, go ahead and adjust them, just go change them, right? And I actually saw that somewhere recently where they they entered a whole bunch of encumbrances, but they didn't post them. I'm not sure the value of that, and I don't believe you can reference the encumbrances on invoices if you don't post them. So I don't know why they were doing it, maybe just to report on them. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit plus, and I'm gonna find my purchase order, 9999, right? And as soon as I save it here, this gives me all the information about it currently. Okay, so I called Ayren and I said, you know, we need some help, or we need some data manipulation, or we need a server migration, and we're gonna add it to our current encumbrance for you. So I'm gonna say, you know, server migration, and we're gonna adjust it up by $3,000. Okay. Now you got to tell me how that affects the detail lines, right? $3,000. Remember we had 2 lines. So on the adjustments tab, we have 2 grids here. Notice that there's buttons here for this grid and there's buttons here for this grid. Okay. So the upper grid is to adjust existing line items, and the lower grid is to create new line items. So you just have to think about what you want to do. Well, when I'm thinking about this encumbrance, do I want to create a new line item, or is it like I want to make the site visit 2 days, so it just got more expensive, or what am I doing here? So so if I wanted to make the site visit 2 days, then I would say I want to adjust an existing line item. So I hit plus and I get this special select line, and and I pull in line 2 and I say I'm going to make line 2 a larger number. Okay, or I say no, I want to I'm going to do a server migration, and I'm going to set the unit cost at $3,000. And this may be this may come from the same budget, but it also might not. I don't know. But I want it to specify the server migration. So I'm going to call it computer software expense, or maybe there's a hardware one. Let's see if that's hardware expense. No. Okay, so I'll do computer software expense. I gotta pick a good cost center. Really doesn't matter to me. Okay, so now I've bumped it up by $3,000, right? And I've got this all set up. Same thing happens here. I'm going to, now some people have a form that they print, and we can set those up for you. If there's some sort of paperwork that you want to link or scan or whatever, that's also fine. So I'm going to now go into posting, and I post this encumbrance adjustment, right? And this is going to do a very similar thing as the encumbrance, but one of the destinations of the encumbrance adjustment posting is the original encumbrance itself, right? Because I need to change it. So I'm going to pick my 999. Okay, so again, found one valid record. It's going to update one budget. It's going to it does 4 general ledger accounts because it's building those pairs, debits and credits, and then it's going to update one purchase order. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Okay, so it's going to adjust $3,000 to computer software expense. It's going to adjust the encumbrance with a new line for $3,000, and then it does the ins and outs of debits and credits with the GL. Okay, batch 7088. So now there's a new line on my encumbrance, right? I said new line with actually has the same budget as up here. And if I go to my budget expenditure ledger, it now says $13,000 instead of $10,000. So my unencumbered balance is $37,000 because I started at 50. Okay, so to put their thought into this, and then when the invoices come in, it makes it very simple, which we're going to show you in a second. But so the biggest thing, well, or a big thing is that we get accurate budgeting, right? And I just know that a significant percentage of you are not budgeting here. It's very easy. You just put in the number right there in the appropriations tab, and it will show up there, and all of a sudden your budget reports will look cleaner. You won't have, so if I go back to that budget on the encumbrance, now it's blue and shows me that there's $37,000 remaining. You know, we're not gonna not allow you to do anything if it goes over, but it's sort of like if you if it's yellow every time because you don't put in an appropriation, then it's sort of a meaningless warning or meaningless error, right? And so if they were mostly blue, but then maybe when I'm entering the encumbrance or I'm entering the invoice, I might say, hey, do we have enough money in this area? Is this going to work, right? And I might pay attention to it. So I do encourage people, if they have the inclination, to enter their appropriations so they can get clean numbers, and then and then the expenditures will just fall into place. We're going to do that next, but the expenditures already will post to the budgets. It's fine. But the encumbrances is an area that many people neglect. And so when you're looking at your budget, you think you have $50,000, but an invoice is coming from me that you know is coming. Okay. So we did our encumbrance. Let's see here, encumbrances, ending. There we go. I didn't expect to see 10,000. So the encumbrance is now $13,000 on this as well. Okay. You can do the same thing in projects if you budget by project, and you can encumber to that project. Okay. So now we put in an encumbrance, we posted it, we put in a change order, and we posted it. Now the star of the show is the invoices. So everybody puts in invoices. All of our clients use invoices to get people paid. So let's talk a little bit about data entry. So everywhere is different. Some people, so what I've seen a lot is people get a stack of paper invoices, or they get PDF invoices or something. They somehow have a batch that they're starting, and they're usually targeting a payment date, like every Thursday or whatever, however often your auditor cuts checks. So the first step is we want to get all the invoices entered that are going to be in that batch for that payment date, if that's the way you do it. Some people are pretty large and they have multiple data entry people, and they may divide up the invoices by vendor name or something like that. And so when I'm entering invoices, I like to use the open initials, right? Especially if you have multiple people entering invoices. If you just have one person entering invoices, then what's nice, I think, is to check this post number box, but leave the post number blank. So now I'm only seeing unposted invoices, right? And if I use the open initials, that's really helpful. If I have 2 or more people entering invoices, then I only see my invoices. By mine, I mean the ones I entered that are unposted. So those are the ones that I'm setting up in this batch. Okay. I could also use a batch number, and by that I mean this field right here. And if you just set that batch number, some people use the date, some people just use anything made up, some people use their name and the date, whatever, it will persist. So if I hit plus, right, then I go and I put in the invoice number, okay, and if whatever batch number I put in here, when I hit the next insert to do the next invoice, it will stay. And so it'll keep hitting that batch number. And so then I can use that batch number on my directory. I can use that batch number in my posting, right? I once saw this woman, she was having a lot of trouble with her selection criteria in her reporting and posting, because she was listing out, she would put in like 30 or 40 invoices, right? And sometimes people stop at a certain number because there's a certain number that their auditor system can handle at once, or whatever. We can handle any number, but we want to be sensitive to that. So she would put in 30 or 40 or 50 invoices, and then she would select each and every one of them on a report or on her posting. And so if there was something wrong and she only got 29 invoices, it was very difficult for her to navigate that list and say, which one did I leave out, or which one did I misspell, or which one is missing, or whatever. And she had this elaborate plan for me to make the selection criteria vertical so it was easier to read, and that she could export the selection criteria. And I said, I think you're solving the wrong problem. The problem is that you're selecting on invoice numbers at all. You should be selecting on, you should create a batch, and then then they all fit together in your batch, and then you just pick that batch, and everything will fall into place, and you select on one thing. So I'm going to put in my invoice. I'm going to select my vendor, and it's going to be the same one we've been using. And my invoice date, I'm in 15/16, so I'm going to say it's 01/01/16. And I'm going to put in my batch number. Okay, so now if I just save at this point, it should pop up and tell me there are outstanding meaning unpaid POs for this vendor. Now, why is my net amount different than my balance due? I'll research that. Okay, so if I have multiple POs for this vendor, it's just saying you don't have to use a PO. It could be a one-off. You could have multiple POs, whatever. So I can pick this, or I could have said I know that this is going to be against a PO, so I'm going to look it up. So there's only one. Yeah, that looks like I want to pay against that PO. So now I've tied this invoice to this PO 999, right? So then I get a little description here. That's nice. Liquidation pops up. So we haven't talked about liquidation yet. So liquidation is if you have, let's say you put in a PO, your PO was 15,000 something for me, and then you know, we get to the end of the work or the end of the year or the end of the site visit or whatever, and we charge you 14,900. So that's great, but we don't want that PO hanging out there with an extra $800 on it or some amount on that PO forever, because first of all, it needs to get closed, and secondly, it will roll forward, and you'll just have this sort of outstanding PO out there, kind of just hanging out that isn't accurate, doesn't mean anything. So most payments are partial payments. That just means this is the first payment, this is the second payment, this is we're moving along the with payments. If you make it a final payment, we will liquidate the rest of the PO. So if you put in a $10,000 PO for some new computers, and then they arrive and the invoice says 9,987 because shipping got calculated or something else, if you put in partial, we will charge 9,987 against that PO, and then you'll have $13 left over in the PO. And so then to deal with that, to clear out that PO, you'll need to adjust that PO. That you need to enter an encumbrance adjustment to lower it by $13, which is annoying. But if you pick final, saying there's not going to be any more invoices on this, then when we post, we will still spend $9,987, and then we will liquidate the rest of the PO. And we'll show it very clearly. If you look at the PO, there is an amount liquidated. So it's a 9,987 expended, $13 liquidated, and everything, and the PO would be done. Okay. So normally I'm going to use partial. That's the default. Okay. And this payment is for the let's say it's for the maintenance. And maybe you put in, you know, the dates, whatever you want to put in, doesn't matter. And the invoice that was sent was $10,000. Okay. Now, many invoices have discounts on them, taxable freight, sales tax, non-taxable freight, use tax. Use tax can be, you can set up use tax locations so we will know the correct use tax to use. So if you're in Eureka, I don't know, let's see here. They don't, I didn't, so use tax locations can, if I double click there, I believe we can set a sales tax rate. Well, why didn't it put in my sales tax rate? I must have done something wrong. I don't know. Huh. I'm gonna see. What triggers us to put that in there. So anyway, each of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fields, you can either put in an amount if you want to just match what the vendor put on their invoice, or you can put in a percent. And you can have a standard sales tax, right? If you find, and your standard sales tax is going to be found in your control file, I believe, file system control file. Right there. But each of these, so if let's just say there, I'm not going to deal with it, but let's say there was a freight charge and they said there was $110 freight charge, I can do that and it will add on to it. Or I can say there was a 1.1% freight charge and we'll calculate it for you. So either way. Okay, so I'm going to leave those blank though. And okay, so now I've been billed for $10,000, right? And invoice subject to use tax. That's probably why. Let's see if this changes anything. Huh. Well, I just told you it's Eureka, right? So there's that. Okay. I don't know. All right, fine. It's not subject to use tax. Okay. So we got a $10,000 invoice, and then we need to set up our detail lines. Now, again, we remember the second reason we enter encumbrances is to set up for the detail line. Okay, so we can go in here and we can look up, and it says, okay, since we know that we're paying against that encumbrance, that PO 9999, which detail line do you want to, so, okay, it's maintenance contract for $10,000, so I'm going to select that one. I could say bring in all the lines and then I can manipulate them myself, but I'm just going to import the selected rows. And what's nice about that is it brings in the description, it brings in the unit cost, it presets my budget. Everything's kind of taken care of. It's pretty nice. Okay, brings in the cost center already for me if there was a vehicle or a project or something else, a repair order. Now, something that we've done kind of recently last year is we had some people that said, well, if we're paying an invoice for a credit card, so they would use credit cards a lot, and then they would get an invoice that was, say, for $20,000 for the credit card, and then but it's obviously for a lot of different purchases from different vendors. Okay, so so they're paying one vendor up here, which is Citibank or Bank of America or something like that. So but then they would list out all the merchant vendor numbers, right? So they could pick the individual vendor numbers and it would pop in there. And the reason for that, and they would put the individual amounts, and then they could report on that as well. So then they have what's called, so there's a secondary vendor in the invoice called a merchant vendor, and that is the, and so then the main vendor would be the bank or the credit card company, and then there would be, if you wanted to list out all these out, because that's otherwise, you don't have any way of saying, well, how much have we spent with this vendor, right? Because it's sort of a pass-through spend, right? You're in otherwise all CAMS knows about is the Citibank or whatever. And so if you want to put those in, you can. Okay. So We're paying against the maintenance contract, right? Which is only one line of the encumbrance. Let's see, what else can we do down here? There's a few things. Oh, we can create a distribution code, which is a fun thing to do. This distribution code is especially nice. So the most common thing we will do in WinCAMS, besides maybe time cards, is probably enter invoices, right? So we have a bunch of tools to try to help you enter them. Obviously, you can copy the invoices. You can mark the invoices as recurring, right? If you check this box, then when you go, there's a posting program, and we will create recurring invoices, and we will create the next month's recurring invoice. So that's really useful if you have an invoice that's the same every month. Even if it's not the same, it's still helpful. So you have maybe a slight variation in the invoice, right? The amount, but you want that invoice to, you know, you're going to get it every month. And so you can have a bunch of recurring invoices. But if you have a similar breakdown of an invoice, right? So we have a lot of clients that they pay like a utility bill, and then that utility bill is broken down sometimes a lot of ways, 50 or 100 lines, right? Well, copying that invoice is cool because then you get the 50 or 100 lines. But if you go to the original invoice and make a distribution code, right? Create distribution code from invoice. Then whatever lines are on that original invoice, we will store. And what this is really useful for if you have the same distribution, right? So here's my web distribution code, and I stored the details, and you'll notice here it says total percentage 100%, and my percent is 100. So if I had 20 lines, it would have stored the individual percents of each line. So it's really helpful. So if you have an overall invoice amount that goes up or down, we will break down that invoice and send it to all the different places that it goes. And of course you can modify it, but based on this cost distribution. So if you have an identical invoice, I would use the recurring invoices if that's going to come ever. Actually, I don't care if it's identical or not. If it's just easier, you have an invoice for your uniforms or for rent or for anything else. You know, mark it recurring and just let it create your recurring invoices for you. You do have to run a posting program, but the invoice will be created no problem, right? And actually, why don't we just do one real quick? But you'll notice here, so if I delete this line and then I say load from select distribution code, and I go pick what my web distribution code, and then it says for each line, do you want me to set the quantity to 1, or are you saying, hey, we bought 100 of something, and so break down the quantity based on those percentages? I'm just going to set the quantity to 1. So then it brings in my line automatically for me. I know it's only one line, that didn't really help me that much, but if there were 20 lines, that would be really nice. And it's changing the amounts based on those percentages. I happen to put in 100%, but that's fine. So if I make this invoice recurring, and then I go to my posting program, create recurring invoices. So my invoice was for January. It now says green recurring up there to indicate that it's recurring. And so I'm going to say January we're going to roll into February. If you want to zero the invoice amount, some people, they use this in such a way that they force themselves to put in the new amounts of every invoice. So they say, I want an invoice to Aramark or to the leasing company or whatever, but I want to be forced to touch it. Well, there's two ways to force you to touch it. One is to zero the amount, so you have to put in the amounts, and the other is to set the on hold status. You can also set a batch number for your newly created invoices like that, and you can change the invoice number. Not everybody needs to change the invoice number, right? Because most systems allow duplicate invoice numbers as long as they have a different date or a different vendor, I suppose. But some places don't, so then we try to increment something to make the invoice number unique. So let's collect records to post. I get one invoice, and then I post valid records. I don't want to write, so now if I go here, remember I have my 98765 for C04000. Here's the same invoice number, same date in February. And it's all created. It references all the same stuff. It's got the same detail lines. Of course, I can change it now if I need to, or delete it. But if I had 10 or 20 or 30 of these, that would be really nice. Okay. So I'm going to delete this February one. So I can copy by going to it. I'm sorry, copy by going to an individual invoice. I can make invoices recurring and copy them sort of in bulk, or I can create distribution codes that will take the sum total amount of my invoice and break it down in the same way every time. Okay. This is if you have our facilities module. This allows you to add, say, if you're entering a utility bill, then you can tell us all the details about the utility billing, therms per whatever, you know, kilowatts, and so then it will add in the building or facility area of that module. It will start tracking a you know, energy usage and such things, right? Which isn't really important to the payable side, but it's important to the to keep track. A lot of people keep track of that in spreadsheets or whatever. This is print barcode labels. That's if you use our shop inventory barcoding system. So then if you bought something, so let's say we were buying 25 spark plugs or 25 cases of spark plugs, then this would print labels on your little printer that have the barcode on little stickers, and then you could stick it on or hand them to the person, or depend, you know, it has to fit into your protocol. Some places they have the shop person enter these invoices so that they can print their labels and put their stickers on. Okay. This is a feature where we have people that want to that want their shop people to enter the receipt of the invoice, right? And so they either put the usage of the part onto a repair order, or they enter a shop inventory receipt, so they directly update their shop inventory, and then we can pull in those values into the invoice. So then we get more real-time data. We don't have to wait for the invoice to be entered and posted before it updates their inventory. So that's another thing that invoice posting can do, right? Is, you know, all these things, if you reference a road or a route or a repair order or etc., we will post the dollar amount, the $10,000, to those things. In addition to drawing down the purchase order and moving the money from encumbered in the budget into expended, but we will also charge the whatever distribution you have. If you tell us a material type of a stock material like shop, and then you look up the location and item number, then you're telling us we are buying this location or this inventory item, and so we will create receipts. Okay. So if we create receipts, then we have to be thoughtful about, okay, where are we putting this into inventory, or are we using it, right? So we create receipts. We don't want to also hit like the road because we're putting it into inventory. So then we need to get it to come out of inventory later and say we used it and put it on the road or put it on a vehicle or whatever. Okay. Now, many people some people don't want to use this tool to create their receipts because they don't want to wait for the invoice to arrive and then the person to enter it and then the reconciliation and then the posting, which might make it take like a month or whatever. We have one tool to help with that. If you do put in locations and item numbers, then in our invoice posting, we have an option to not do a full posting, but to only create inventory receipts. So you have two options with inventory receipts. One is, or three. One is to enter them directly in the inventory receipt. And then if you want to set it up, you can do the thing that pulls in, helps create the invoice from those previously entered inventory receipts. So now, then when you enter it in inventory receipts, your inventory goes up in real time. And then the invoice is there to pay the bill. Or you can enter the invoice and let it post to create inventory receipts. And if that sounds like a long delay, then in here, you can use that option and it will post. It's like a pre-posting. It's only a partial posting. So you don't have to wait. If you're waiting for, I don't know, warrant numbers or whatever protocol is going on in finance, I don't want the finance people to be holding the operational people back from getting their data. That's another kind of crusade of mine. In addition to that connectivity, that's why we linked up the repair order labor with the time cards, or optionally, not all of you use that. And that's why we linked up the repair order parts with the inventory. So it draws down your inventory the minute you put in repair order parts usage, okay? What else can you do in here? You can move lines up or down. I only have one line here, but these arrows will move lines up or down. This will sort lines by line number, right? Now, this is interesting. So I brought in my line from a distribution. So I need to make sure that my line number is here so that it doesn't know my line number on the purchase order. I want to make sure that it's hitting the right line on the purchase order when we post this. So I can renumber lines if I want to. If you're using a purchase order, then the line number becomes critically important because you want to expend from the correct line number. Also, another thing that's interesting is, let's say you put in your purchase order and you reference this budget, and then this budget runs out of money, or you realize that it was wrong, or whatever reason, you change your mind. You don't want to pay out of that budget anymore. Well, then you can go into this invoice, and even though it brought this stuff in, you can change this stuff. You're not locked in. And even with the budget or the project, it's even smart enough to say, okay, I know that the encumbrance was to 2148, and now you're doing this to 2614. So I will unencumber out of 2148, but I'll still expend out of the new budget. So it's smart enough to do that, and it'll even tell you that it's doing that. It'll pop something up on the screen. Okay, so now we've entered our invoice. It references the PO. I bet the PO is going to now show us a pending charge, right, of $10,000. The total PO was $15,460, right? I had to hit the calculator to get this to show up. So pending payment of $10,000. So the pending balance of this PO is $54.60. It doesn't yet show in the in here because they're not posted. This is for posted invoices. It shows in the pending here, okay, and it's running balance and the running balance as the invoices hit this PO. Okay, so the next step with an invoice for many people is some sort of communication with the auditor. So WinCAMS doesn't print checks unless you're one of 5 small fire districts that we work with in California. It's very uncommon for us to print checks. So most people, they need to get the information to their auditor system to print checks. So there are different ways of doing that. 3 different ways of doing that, I would say. 4 different ways of doing that. One is you enter the invoice in WinCAMS, and then you go enter the invoice in your auditor system. It's my least favorite way. Double entry, yuck, extra work, possibility for error, no fun, okay? Number two is, and this was the way most people did it back in the old days, and still many people do, is you print a form. It's usually called a claim form, sometimes called a voucher form. You may have different, some people call it by the color of the paper, goldenrod, blue sheets, white claims, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so that is, if you want to have that set up, then it's usually right here, print claim, and it says, do I want to print claim? It's going to call the claim printing program, and it's going to, do I want just this invoice, vendor, and date, or do I want the whole batch of webinar, or do I want all claims that have not yet been printed that were opened by me? So I'm just going to pick this one invoice, and then I think the claim form that I have running here is not very, very pretty. It's one that prints on a pre-printed sheet. So it looks, you can't, this is a pre-printed sheet that they have loaded into their printer, and so these fit in the exact spots where they're supposed to. We have a lot of other claim forms where we draw all the lines and put a header in there and reference the whatever you need, the vendor's address, whatever we can do it. Okay, so that's the second way. You enter it into WinCAMS, then you print a claim form and you send that to the auditor or hand it to the auditor. And frankly, I don't love that either, but if you have to do it, you have to do it. It's usually not in your control, but because what that normally means is that the auditor is going to re-enter your claim as well, right? And remember that a claim may be multiple invoices, right? So if you have 3 invoices or 5 invoices or 20 invoices for one vendor in the same run, it may go all onto the same claim, okay? My favorite option is to export this invoice, right? So let's see. So if I go to CAMS, direct charges, interfaces, these are 100% custom. So this particular, well, this is a test client, but this particular client has a bunch of exports and imports. Some people, it's a option in your claim form printing, but all of them are customized because the auditor's system, has certain requirements for what they want to accept in the format that they want it in. And unfortunately, I've never found an auditor system where that uses the exact same format. Like we have many one solution clients, Munis clients, PeopleSoft clients, right? And we can interface with all of them, but just because we interface with one Munis client, I can't guarantee that the same format will work for the next Munis client. I don't know if they have the same version as you. I don't know if they bought something special from Munis, whatever. But it's not that big of a project normally. So they go to export invoices, and they run a little report. Okay, so here are the invoices that have not yet been exported. It tells us some things about whatever. This is what they wanted to see, right? And no, my invoice isn't even in here. Maybe because I already told it that it went to the auditor or something. Maybe because it's not approved. I don't know. But so if I like what I'm seeing in my report, then I go back to here and I say, so this is something, I think this was for Tulare County or something that I have here, where it prints a form during the export. We can also do the export during the printing. Oh, because they're unencumbered. I'm going to pick IN invoices, and I bet I will find my invoice again. There it is, Cascade Software, $10,000. Okay. So it's basically saying these are the 2 that were not yet. I could have selected on a batch number or something else, but these are the 2 that have not been exported. So I say, yep, that looks good. I want to write to the export file. I'll save it to my my desktop, or we can, oh, so this is really cool. So many people, when they export their invoices, they still have to they have to get a copy of the original invoice form, the invoice from the vendor over to the auditor, or they have to scan it on the auditor system or something. So one of my dreams is to have is to be able to send those attachments. And the only place where I've been able to find to get find the right people to deal with it is at Tulare County. So it says attachments copied to blah blah blah, and that this actually, when we send this export, we send the attachments with it. And the receiving side is a system called Ayren, and it also picks up those attachments. So that's really cool. Let's see here. So then when so this is what the export looks like. In this case, it is just a fixed position file with document and lines. You don't even need to look at it. Sometimes they're comma separated files. We basically set it up whatever way that the auditor wants it, and then you. Now sometimes you are also running the auditor system and you load them in. No errors, no double entry. As far as I'm concerned, you can do hundreds of invoices at a time. Many auditor systems or imports only allow like 40 in a batch, something along those lines. And so, we've got double entry, we've got printing a form and sending it to the auditor. We've got sometimes people do both. We exporting to the auditor. And so if you are currently doing double entry, or if you are not communicating with the auditor, let me know, and I'm happy to try to work together on getting that communication going and saving work and eliminating errors. And then the fourth way is people that go the other direction. It's not that common, mostly because we generally track a lot more information than the auditor system about the details and cost centers, and they track budgets too, but projects and vehicles and things like that. But we do that at a few places, several places, where their auditor system does not allow imports, and so they don't want to do double entry. So they enter into their auditor system, then their auditor system creates a file, and then we import it. And so then they have something in their interfaces that says import invoices, right? Now, oftentimes when we export, we have a corresponding import that's basically payment confirmations. So if all goes well, we export to the auditor, and then they do whatever they do, and then they cut their checks, and then they send us back a file that gives us warrant numbers and dates. Okay. And so then you can see right in WinCAMS that it was paid. Maybe some people wait for that before they post, etc. Now, if you don't have that, it's still nice to know that it was paid, right? So, so I go to my references tab, and I can, well, I guess that in this case, we already know the voucher number because we set the voucher number when we exported this invoice. But let's say the auditor warrant number, they come back and they give us a report, and they say, well, we paid on this warrant, and we paid on 3/20/21, right? Oops, maybe 3/20/16. Okay. So, so it's nice to fill those in, and so then I can verify that if I go to my directory and that vendor is calling, I can see, okay, I call and what's going on. I can see right here in WinCAMS, it was paid here, and maybe I want my warrant number as well. And I say, well, Ayren, it was paid on check 12345 on 3/20/2016. Okay. So that's kind of nice to sort of step through the process. So when the invoices get created, then I can see that they're, you know, I might say, well, what was their interface date, right? Or their auditor date. Their interface date here. And I'm going to move my warrant number up. Okay, so I can see then that well, I must not have set it to mark the interface date, but it usually automatically marks the interface date. Put that in there. Oh, here's the warrant number and the warrant date, and I can sort of track it through. And then the post number will be last, right? Okay, so now I have entered the invoice. I have printed my claim form. I have exported to the auditor system. Yeah, so Roy is saying that when they get their invoices back from the auditor via import, the warrant number and date comes back with the import and it fills in. So you can, so that's great if you're using that. If you don't have that, you can type it in, and then we also have this lightning bolt that says copy the same warrant number and date to any other invoices that match this invoice's same vendor, date printed, interface date, and voucher number, right? So that means if I have 10 invoices from Aramark Uniforms, I know that they all went on to the same claim and they all got paid on the same check. So I put it in once, and we'll try to help you by hitting the other invoices that fit there. But otherwise, it might be that you just go to those invoices and fill it out manually. If you want to, you don't have to. Okay, so I'm going to mark this invoice printed and interfaced, and we're good. Okay, so now I want to close some things here. Now it's time to post this invoice. See, this is one where we put a whole bunch of reports in here, but what I really want is a link to the posting program. So we'll have to add that. So I go to Post AP Invoices. And I'm going to do a full regular posting. It was still on create inventory receipts because it was there before. Some people are using the approval status as as a check and balance, and so then you can use check invoices must also be approved to qualify. Just be careful with that, because if you check that box, then I know this sounds obvious, but then we're not going to pick up any invoices that aren't approved. So if you forget to approve one or you leave it out, then we're sort of left in the dust. Okay, so well, let's just see what we can find here. Okay, so we found a bunch of invoices. I'm just going to pick my invoice. So I'm going to pick invoice number. I think it was this one. So you don't normally need to do this. You might do that, however you do your work, you might do this by batch number. You might do this by who entered it. Remember that, of course, we will never post the same invoice twice. So you've got that going for you. There's not any real reason why you can't post everything. But if you want to use batch numbers, dates, interface batch numbers, whatever, your own, some people, I'm only responsible for my own invoices that I entered, etc. Okay, so I found one invoice. Now you'll notice that it's going to hit budget encumbrances, right? Because it's referencing that PO. It's going to, of course, hit a $10,000 expenditure to some budget, and the cost center we put in. It's going to do a similar like debiting and crediting of our general ledger, and it's going to update one purchase order. If it had any shop materials on it, or it can post all over the place. Okay, so let's write our audit trails. So it's got a $10,000 expenditure to the budget here's the encumbrance where it's basically moving money from encumbrance to expenditure. And then here's where it's a partial liquidation, and it's going to expend 10,000. So now, just to show you what I meant about the liquidation, let's go back to the invoice and change it from partial to final. So now let's see what happens with our posting. I'm going to recollect. Now, when I look at my audit trails, and I go to what it's posting to the encumbrance document, does this not show me? Well, it knows that it's final, right? I think, let's see, does this show liquidation amount? It's supposed to show me a liquidation amount. It knows it's final, so it should be liquidating the rest of the PO, or the encumbrance, 9999. I think it will. All right, so but it's not a final payment, so I'm going to make this a partial payment. Fine. And I will come back to my guy here, collect. And now I'm just going to post because I live dangerously. And now, so the invoice, this is interesting. Notice that I'm filtered on only unposted invoices. So now the invoice is just gone, right? It looks like it appears to be gone. It's out of because I'm filtered on post number blank. So if I get rid of that, I should be able to see my invoice again. There, it's back. So I turned off, don't filter on post number anymore. But that can be disconcerting when you go back to the invoice and it's gone, well, because it doesn't fit your filter anymore, okay? So now the status of this is posted, okay? And if we go to the PO, I can see that let's see here. I have $10,000 expended, so my current balance is only $54.60. And if I get this to refresh, there's no pending anymore. And now in the references, there's my invoice, right? So I expended 10,000. It was not final, so my running balance is $54.60. If I go to the budget, now the balance is $3,000. My total encumbrance amount for this encumbrance was $13,000, and my expended amount is $10,000, right? And why was the total encumbrance different here than the total encumbrance here? Because remember, we went to two different budgets. So only this line and this line are showing up under this budget. I have to go to this other budget to see the other $24.60. Okay. And if I go to the main tab, I can now see that I have a $10,000 expenditure, and I have $3,000. Is this right? Let me see here. There we go. $10,000. Yeah. So I have a $10,000 expenditure now, and instead of $13,000 encumbered, I have only $3,000 still encumbered. So you'll notice what's interesting about this is that my unexpended balance went down. I have now spent 10,000, and I started with 50,000 in this budget, so I'm down to 40,000 remaining. However, my unencumbered balance stayed exactly the same because I already had, it used to say 50 here, 0 here, and 13 here for 37,000. So what ends up happening when you use encumbrances is that when we post the invoice, it basically moves the $10,000 from the encumbrances into the expenditures. So the net, but what's cool about it is that we already knew we were at $37,000. So we get kind of ahead of the game this way. And we know we have much more accurate and forward-looking budgeting, right? because, so we already knew, there's no surprise here. All that happened was we went from a contract or a promise to pay me to actually having paid me, right? And if I go to pending expenditures, right? So now I have 0 pending expenditures when I recalculated that, right? So so my pending balance is this, because pending expenditures brings in invoices that are not yet posted. Okay, so that's invoices. Hopefully we covered everything in invoices. The third type of transaction, there is a fourth type of transaction called an adjusting journal, but I think only one client has those. They look a lot like journals, or maybe other people have them. I don't know. Very few people use them. Let's put it that way. Journals are for two things. They are for corrections and adjustments. They're just a document that you can put in to hit anything. They have less rules than other things. They don't. Uh-oh, my journal. Maybe I'll try somebody else. My journals are being updated or something. Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Back when we could go places. Let's try, I don't know, Fresno. So journals can be used for just updating anything. You know, I want to charge this vehicle or this road or this budget with $10, or I want to give revenue to this vehicle, or I want to correct this any ledger, any master that we can think of, where we don't really need a specific transaction. And so it's used a lot in California for your payroll actuals. A lot of your actuals will be, you know, there's no transaction for it, but you want to match up with your applied charges. And so I see your message, Roy. So if you, whatever you want to, you know, so this is saying, and we've got this is confusing to accountants and confusing to me, but basically, who are we taking money from? Where are we spending the money? Who are we giving money to? So it can be either a two-sided journal, and if you've been around long enough to remember when we were back in DOS, when I started, there was there were two kinds of journals. There were journal vouchers, which were two-sided, and journals, which were just adjusting entries. And when we went to Windows, we realized, why do we need two screens? You know, we can just have a one-sided journal. So it doesn't have to be balanced. But when we put in a journal, we can number it anything we want. We can give it any date we want. I'm going to put it back into that fiscal year, and we can say, you know, correcting whatever, erroneous vehicle charges. And then if we want to, we can put in a debit control and a credit control. This is to basically help us make sure we get our totals right, you know, our distributions adding up correctly, right? So I might say, okay, I'm going to debit $1,300 and I'm going to credit also $1,300. Doesn't have to be balanced. It's not required. Oh, now I'm in 2021 because I went to this other system. So let's go back to 2021. Okay. The reimbursable checkbox, that is not for you to check. That's for us to check. That means we created this journal. right? And so we created this journal from either reimbursable project, reimbursable vehicle, reimbursable motor pool, reimbursable service request. We created this journal to basically say, hey, that other agency owes usually you, the source agency, money. So charge that other agency and charge and revenue, bring back revenue to your agency. Now, it's totally up to you whether that's done through journals or whether you send them a bill and it's done through AR, that's fine. Okay, we have the same recurring functionality and a posting program here for journals as we did for invoices. But we put in our control numbers, and then we also can pull in from distribution codes just like we did before. So if you have a distribution code where you are listing out a whole bunch of projects that you're charging, or a bunch of agencies or a bunch of budgets that you're charging for a share of something that you figured out, we can help you. You do it once, add it to a distribution code, and then you can select from that distribution code, put in the total, and we'll break it down for you. Okay. And the other really nice thing about distribution codes is that they persist from year to year. So you don't have to worry about not being able to find your old journal to copy from. So if I put in, so $1,300, let's say, and I want to, I can do, I'm a lot more open. Like I could have no budget. It's totally okay for me in a journal to have no budget. I may just say, well, I want to charge $1,300 to Manning eastbound, road 5006.00, or to this vehicle, or to even a service request, or certainly to a project, whatever, right? Okay, in this case, they require a cost center. So that is one rule. I don't think that's true for everybody. I'm not even charging to a project. There we go. Okay, so what I'm saying is I'm going to charge this cost center and this road segment $1,300. Okay, and maybe I'm doing this as a correction, right? So I said, well, I want to go to road 5006 and I want to give money back to road 5007, like it was an incorrect entry. So this is one of the ways, when people call me and they say, hey, we didn't update our equipment rates or something like that. Well, one of the ways and we posted a bunch of time cards, one of the ways to fix that is to run a report, get the total amount that you posted incorrectly, right? So you posted $1,000 and it should have been 1,100. So you can, if it's all to one vehicle, you can just put in one line here. You can also do it with correcting entries on the time cards, but there might be hundreds of entries and you might not want to do it. So you may want to do a summarized entry to move the money from one place to another. And I could do that two ways. I could enter a positive 1,300 going to road 5006 and a negative 1,300 going to road 5007, right? Saying I want to back off the expenditure to 5007, which was wrong. Or I could enter over here where I want to give money to or credit 5007 with the 1,300 here. Okay. So there's my 5007. I think it's going to require, this side doesn't require a cost center. This is Fresno's specific rules. Okay, so now it's saying give money to road 5007. Any ledger that is an expenditure ledger, if we give money to it, the only thing we can do is we're going to do a negative expenditure, right? So now, where you have to be careful is the ledgers that are two-sided ledgers, vehicles and projects, basically, right? And so because then if you say credit a project, well, we are capable of giving that project revenue, right? And so you may not want that to be revenue, you may want it to be a reduction in the expenditures, right? So a reduction, so we will change the sign here, and so if we post this, we should get a and there may be a form too. Let's see if there's a form. And yeah, Here's a form. So this is kind of a standard journal voucher form. Apparently I didn't have any, I didn't have any budget accounts, so there's nothing to print here, but I'm just, so maybe I don't need a form here because moving charges from one vehicle to another might not cause anything to want to tell the auditor about, right? So I don't really, this isn't, but this is what the standard journal form looks like. We have some customized ones for certain people as well. Okay, so I print the form, and then in the posting, what I want to see is how it's going to handle. So in a one-sided ledger, then when effectively it should be the exact same thing if I put a negative $1,300 on the from side versus a positive $1,300 on the to side, right? It should end up the exact same thing, because what I'm doing is I'm trying to back out a charge. Right? I can't give revenue to a road. Roads don't track revenues, so they can track negative expenditures. Now, if I can give revenue to something like a project, then what we're going to be looking at is, well, the way we usually determine it is based on the budget. Are you referencing a revenue budget? Well, then we'll give revenue to the project. If you're referencing a expenditure budget, then which we have to reverse the sign of the 1,300 to post to the expenditure budget, we're going to reverse the sign to the project as well. So let's just see what we've got here. No, we've got a whole bunch. Let's quit that. I'm going to select on journal number. I have no recollection. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sounds good. Whoa. Okay, so you see here it's going to hit 1 cost center and 2 roads, right? And so if I go to the preview my audit trails, so the cost center is going to be debited because the cost center was on the debit side, right, and not on the credit side. And then if I go to my next audit trail, roads, here's what I wanted to show you. So the road gets a $1,300 other charge. That's for the debit or from side of the journal. And then the other road, 5007, gets a negative $1,300 charge, and it went to material, and that's because over here on the to side, I said project cost category material, so it thinks it's material. But so because that's the only way to give money to a road is to reduce its expenditures, okay? And so it's pretty flexible. I can put things on both sides. I could have done the same thing here. I could copy this line to the clipboard and then go to here and paste from the clipboard, and then I could change this to negative 1,300, and I should get the same thing. Although in the case of Fresno, they require a valid cost center. And both invoices and journals have this button here to reverse the sign of detail lines. Okay. What else is important about journals? They're pretty straightforward, I think. There's not, I don't think there's a lot to discuss in those. Communication with the auditor, whether you print a form, whether you even need to talk to the auditor, because again, if you're updating a road or a service request or a vehicle, the auditor generally doesn't even know about that as long as it came out of the right budget, right? So, and I think that's it. I'm running out of time here, but I hope to do a little bit on reporting. I think So the reports in this module are based on each transaction, right? Because this is not a receiver of costs. So you're not going to see things like our typical ledger reports or expenditure detail reports. So we're looking for transactions. So if you go into direct charges and reports, you can go into the invoice report, and then we will break down each invoice for you. So actually, I forgot I was in Fresno. So there's lots and lots of invoices. So let me go back to my friend here. Reports, direct charges, invoices. So all the reporting stuff that oh, it's in the journal. Okay. All the reporting stuff that you can see in my videos on reporting on our website or on the WinCAMS channel on YouTube applies here. You know, you've got your typical control breaks and selection criteria, and basically we're just reporting on these transactions. So if you want to enter a batch, maybe you select on your batch number, but we're basically digging in vendor and then the invoice number and then each line, right? And so if whatever I want to see, maybe I want to see you know, budget expenditures, numbers, and maybe project numbers. And maybe I select on my own, or maybe, you know, we also added include vendors that have no activity because of that thing that I talked about, where people have lots of vendors that they want to purge their vendors. So this will show vendors that have no invoices, right? Let's see what that looks like. So first it runs the report, then it adds sections for vendor. Vendor has no invoices. So now I think, okay, maybe I want to deactivate or delete these vendors that show up with no invoices. Okay. Not a ton to say about reports there. I mean, there's so much richness in our reporting, but if you want to know about how to run reports, what control breaks are, what selection criteria is, how to do optional columns, all of that is really identified in our reporting videos, and other webinars where we do that. I think that's about it for direct charges. I'm sure I missed a bunch of stuff. Please feel free to email me, Ayren, A-Y-R-E-N, at cascadegovsoftware.com or support@cascadegovsoftware.com, and let me know of anything that you are trying out that doesn't work. Roy, I see your message there. I'll look into that, and I think that's about it. Okay, thanks for attending. I will put this up on our YouTube channel, and if you go on YouTube, search for WinCAMS channel and our website, and I will let everybody know, make sure that we have the correct contact information for your site, and I will let everybody know webinar number 9. And if you have any topics that you'd like me to cover that you don't see on the list or that are, you know, you're using, please don't hesitate to email. Thanks. Have a great afternoon.